Hi, everybody. Welcome to the session. We're about to start in 1 minute, but I have my friend Angelou just say exactly what you do. I wanted to bring you on as my, we went to college together.
Thank you, my buddy Chip, as I affectionately have always called you. I will never call you George. I got to call you Chip.
They found out my nickname, so they know.
I know. But Greenie Youth Foundation has been around for about 15 years, and our focus is really connecting diverse young people to the outdoors and careers in conservation. So we do that through numerous programs like paid internship opportunities to work with federal land management agencies. We have an urban youth corps program for young adults that aren't necessarily going the college route, but are interested in a trade or profession in the outdoor field. And then we also have an environmental literacy program that we do for
Welcome to Zoom Life, right, everybody?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session. We're so glad to have you guys here as a continuation of the ASA last week.
Sure. We
had some major technical difficulties. Look at Rachel's face, everybody. Look at her. Look at her, everybody. She's good. But before we start this session, we just want to thank everybody for coming on. We know everyone's about to start class and getting ready. By a show of hands, Rachel brought this discussion up earlier. How many people are going to be online, and how many people are going to be in person?
I'm online.
All right.
Online.
That's a cell phone. Yeah,
Online.
This is my home phone.
Online?
Mm-hmm.
Online.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Online.
Yeah.
Good. Great.
Wait. Yeah. So this one is the 646 that you call it.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cell phone. Yes.
So before we start, love to find out who's in the room, and I know we all, we love to turn our thing off and on, but we love to see faces and so forth. So if we can everyone do an introduction. There's only 15, 16 of us.
Yes,
So we will start with, let's go with Dr. Cato. You're the first one in, so you get to go first.
Everyone, Vicky Kato, Georgetown University, and I'm very, very excited that I was able to join you all with this kind of extended ASA experience. So, hi.
Great. We'll go with, keep on going. People could just self-introduce. That'll be better.
popcorn style.
Okay, I'll go next. I'm Judy Halas. I'm an associate professor of sociology at the State University of New York.
Thank you, Judy.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go. My name is Fang Xu. I'm trained as urban sociologist, but now teaching as a lecturer in the interdisciplinary studies program at UC Berkeley.
Is Dr. Cornus and Hudson Ian?
Oops, someone got a they got to put themselves on mute. Figure out who it is.
BUS.
Go for it. Who's next?
I'm Rachel. Hi.
Yeah,
I'm at WVU, West Virginia. I'm an urban sociologist in the middle of Appalachia.
Dr. Courtbus, K-O-R-T.
Hi, I'm Krista, and I'm going to tell Leonard to put himself on mute.
Courtbus.
And I'm in urban studies at Boise State University.
Yeah. Nope, T is in Tom.
All right, who's that? I'm trying to figure out who that is.
K-O-R-T as in Tom. I can't think of another T word.
Okay, hi everybody.
Hillary!
Yes.
Hi everybody. I'm lurking and multitasking, but
That's him.
I still teach
That's
about
him.
the creative class, so I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say. So it's nice to see all of you.
John, Leonard, Mario, Elena, anyone else want to jump in?
Hi everyone, Elena here. Sorry, my video is a little murky this morning. So yeah, I'm an urban sociologist also at City University of New York. Very nice to see people, and I'm really happy to participate. Thank you for rescheduling.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm a professor at sociology at Mills College in California. Thank you for putting this on. I've told a few students about it. Hopefully others are here as well. Thank you for having this.
I'm Stephen Tuttle. I'm a instructor at Loyola University Chicago and Columbia College Chicago. And I just defended this summer.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Rob Litchfield.
Probably introduce myself. Yep, yeah, go ahead.
I'm Rob Litchfield. I'm a management professor at Washington Jefferson College. I'm Rachel's co-author.
Hey,
And I'm Jan Lin, and I'm one of the speakers. I'm at Occidental College in Los Angeles in the Department of Sociology.
Hi everybody, I'm Gordon Douglas. I'm not using video this morning, but I'm a assistant professor of urban planning at San Jose State out here in California. Hi everybody, nice to see some of you, or all of you, but some of you I know.
Couple more, and then we'll get started. I think we got everybody. That is good, everyone. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is George Chip Greenidge. I'm a PhD candidate and at Georgia State University in Race and Urban Studies. And I got the pleasure to meet Rachel and Jan and several other people to start to have this conversation about the failures of the creative class city. I'm gonna give you a brief description. This session examines struggles found in the creative city class, including poor life satisfaction among creative workers, the effects of the creative class, colonizing communities in marginalized places, and particularly communities of color, less developed countries, and struggling small towns, and the rise of new forms of community as creative class leave traditional work structures. And just personally, I'm from Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm an African-American male from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I have 4 generations there. And in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that's the home of Harvard and MIT. So it's really interesting for me growing up, being around such great students that were mentors to me growing up and being my tutors from those 2 places and so forth. And so I understand the pieces about a creative class and the support and the great activities that it can do, especially from a university, someone that grew up in a university town. I was up on those campuses every day, being able to participate, and really a lot of those great supportive mechanisms really helped me make the person that I am today. But it's interesting, I went to school at Morehouse College in Atlanta. And so I became I became a creative class person when I went down there as a student that, and Morehouse and Spelman, as Angelo knows, that we were right in the middle of the housing developments. And so kind of looking at it, and as I was reading on all the different work that we're doing here, I kind of realized that, I became that person as well, coming down and being mentoring and tutoring young people and becoming an entrepreneur and all those things in those areas as well. So it's just very interesting looking at both of those sides of those pieces as well. As we go forward, we were going to have 2 presentations. We didn't decide who was going to go first. Jan, you ready to go first?
Sure, that's fine.
All right.
Okay, let me see how the screen share works. And it looks like you have to enable the screen share as the host. And now, yeah, where you'll find that is another issue, but I should have probably emailed it to you in advance. But usually Zoom permits screen share by all participants, usually. So
let me figure that out.
And in the meantime, you want me to email it to you just in case, or?
Yes, please do.
Okay. In the meantime, okay.
I'll grab it real quick. Okay, I'm gonna click the green button.
Oh, so I don't need to email it then.
I'm trying to figure out optimize screen share, share screen. And files. Nope, it's not doing it.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay, let me see if I can, okay, now I just sent it. And then,
yep, give me a second.
Okay. I just thought that I would introduce, so the location of my study is Northeast Los Angeles. Northeast Los Angeles is kind of an extension of East Los Angeles. So East Los Angeles is known as the kind of mother ward of the Latinx barrio, and Northeast Los Angeles is just an extension of it. It's the neighborhood surrounding my college, Occidental College, in which I've been teaching now for 20 years. And basically the research is based upon mainly the last 7 or 8 years of work that I've done there, working with students, sending them out in the field to do interviews, to be doing my own interviews. It's based also upon US Census work. And it's even based on some work that I did with a HUD grant going all the way back to the year 1999 to 2002. So it really is the kind of culmination of almost a career of work at Occidental College. And so we'll just see if the screen share is up yet. It's not quite up, and I sent the file. The file is, yeah, the PowerPoints are usually pretty big files, so it'll probably take a while to load. But
go ahead, keep on going. I got you. It's coming up.
Okay, and so in the meantime, let me see. Yeah, screen share is almost up. And so my study is, yeah, it's a study of the artists in the Northeast Los Angeles area and how they have been a part of Northeast LA through various cycles of the urban history cycle. And it looks like we just about have, okay, there we go. And okay, and now I'm not sure if it'll work. Yeah, do you want to try clicking onto it there?
Yep.
And now rather than starting the whole slideshow, should I just go slide by slide?
Yes.
Okay, now let me see if I'm able to actually, okay. So let me see if I'm able to control it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is based upon my book, Taking Back the Boulevard, which was published by NYU Press just last year, Art, Activism, and Gentrification in Los Angeles. Here is an artwork of Northeast Los Angeles, and the important thing to see is that it is tucked in these foothills of Northeast Los Angeles, and there are all these highways bisecting it. So this is a streetcar suburb built at the turn of the 20th century. And it has seen better times because it declined over the mid-century when all these highways, as so typical in Los Angeles, cut through it. But after many years of decline, it became revitalized and has become gentrified. And artists like this artist, Raul de la Sota, a Latinx artist, are quite typical of the Northeast LA area. Locating Northeast LA, it's between Glendale and Pasadena, and here's Los Angeles, but Northeast LA is this little northeast corner down here. LA Times article of the year 2000 pronouncing that this was hipster USA, the neo-bohemia that Richard Lloyd writes about. Here's another map of Northeast LA showing the constituent neighborhoods. And in the south is Boyle Heights, which is the center of Latinx East LA, right next to downtown. Many of those Latinx populations moved into Northeast LA following civil rights legislation in the 1960s, following the political renaissance that Latinx peoples in LA experienced. My research follows this so-called stage model of gentrification. It's an area in urban geography and sociology that was pioneered by Dennis Gale and Philip Clay, looking around the country, especially in the Northeast, but also at San Francisco, distinguishing between a pioneer phase of gentrification. When pioneers and homesteaders come in, they are subsequently displaced by actual gentrifiers. Hackworth and Smith wrote about historical waves of this, and in 2008, Loretta Lees and her companions wrote about and compared the stage model both in London and in Park Slope, Brooklyn, and they went on to promote a global comparative gentrification studies based upon stage model. The stage model can actually be associated with life cycle models of urban transition that were pioneered by Hoover and Vernon and even Jacobs. If you think of Jacobs' a renowned book, The Death and Life of American Cities, she's really talking about cycles of birth, growth, maturation, and death, and then possible rebirth. And then there was Schwerian, who set up a life cycle model of neighborhood transition. And really, my question then,
much the same thing, but I didn't know what to say.
What is the changing historical role of creative artists and people of color across these different stages of neighborhood transition? And then what I do is I look at these stage models, but I go back in time and I point out that first there was a period of actual emergence of this neighborhood when artists were central in this era of investment, that you had an inner ring streetcar suburb in Northeast Los Angeles that was developed, and it became the art center of the West Coast arts and crafts movement. It was called the Arroyo culture. Then there was a period of disinvestment in the mid-20th century when there was post-war freeway construction and jobs and people went to the outer suburbs, leading to the decline of Northeast LA, followed by a period of reinvestment by pioneers. And what this is reminding us is before there's reinvestment, there has to be disinvestment so that we can understand these broader cycles. And that in this period of reinvestment, we had Latin American and Asian immigrants coming into the area, that the area was opened up to them because of civil rights legislation and also immigration liberalization legislation, and that we can follow this kind of trend across many cities. And that after the revitalization stage, you have this gentrification stage when the pioneers and homesteaders are later displaced. And there was actually a period interrupting this reinvestment phase, the Great Recession. But what that did is it allowed speculators to come in and buy foreclosed properties, so that right at the end of the Great Recession, we really get a ramping up and acceleration of gentrification, and now the displacement of pioneers, including artists and many of the Latinx populations. So that now we have in Northeast Los Angeles that is, like also in Boyle Heights, a place that we can call, I like to call Portlandia in the Southland. It's a green, artistic neo-bohemia where we have campaigns to take back the boulevard from the cars and automobiles and reinstate public transport and bicycle lanes, and return ourselves to kind of going back. It's kind of like going back to the future, going back to the streetcar era, and opening up the city for a new class of people. Now, the Taking Back the Boulevard campaign reduced automobile traffic to enhance access for bicycles and pedestrians amidst this broader expansion of the LA urban transit system. And I follow George Lloyd in looking at, Richard Lloyd, in looking at Northeast LA as a neo-bohemia, a place with art studios, collectives, and art centers, a lot of indie cafes and restaurants, an emphasis in small business life on handcrafted goods, vintage vinyl, thrift and used resale clothes, small printing, small publication presses, mom and pop businesses, even that artists have tried to brand it as old Route 66. And we see here the convergence of Latinx culture and vintage Americana. I distinguish three waves of creative class artists. In the revitalization stage, we had a wave of Latinx artists associated with the Mexicano Art Center and Centro de Arte Público, then white artists encouraged by the colonization of these Latinx pioneers created what they called an Arroyo Arts Collective, and they rekindled this idea of Arroyo Arts and handcrafted arts. And then both in the revitalization stage, but in the gentrification stage, now we have a new collection of Latinx artists, and they have a much more problematic attitude about the arts and art galleries, seeing them now as not vehicles of social change, but vehicles of gentrification. Following the racial ethnic transition, we see that blue is the white population in Eagle Rock and Highland Park, and the white population declines from 1960 in both communities from percentages of 90+% down to around 30% to around 10% in Highland Park, and the red is Latinos, Hispanics. They become the majority population, but between 2000 and 2100, we see a gradual uptick of the white population and a decline of the Latinx with the gentrification trend. The early Arroyo artist, Charles Lummis, the publisher of The Land of Sunshine, a booster magazine that he brought artistic credibility to. He's called LA's first multiculturalist in LA's first art colony because he cultivated and gave room for women writers. He also championed Native American rights. He created the Southwest Museum for the American Indian, and he built his own home out of Riverstone. That's the arts and craft method. The revolution against factory mass production, this type of marrying of a type of politics with art and an embrace of medieval hand building and design methods. So that William Judson actually, he had a studio that created stained glass in the medieval style, that at his campus, at Judson Studios, came other Arroyo Guild and arts and crafts designers and proponents who created this concept of the Arroyo Guild and of the craftsman with his hammer held high, saying, we can triumph over factory production. That the same attitude about handmade arts was followed by Clyde Brown in creating Abbey San Encino. He was the main printer for Occidental College. Occidental College students helped him to build this medieval chapel. Occidental College students were invited to hold their fraternity initiations and weddings in the basement as a thank you. And his grandson is Jackson Brown, the quintessential singer-songwriter of the 1970s. In his second album, For Every Man, he posed himself, for every man, the working man, in the courtyard of his grandfather's home that he moved into. Jackson Brown moved out of the area in the 1960s in a wave of white flight and suburbanization by whites. He moved to Fullerton in Orange County, and in the wake of white flight, we saw a wave of Latinx artists come in. Richard Duardo, Patricia Parra, who's sitting in front of the Craftsman home that she and others bought for only a few $1,000s, and that there were older whites, gray-haired white populations largely tribalists, and that they moved in this community and they brought the spirit of social change and political protests surrounding the Chicano blowouts that were criticizing inequality in the school system, the Chicano moratorium, the marches against the Vietnam War, and through their muralism, where they took the older methods of muralism of the Mexican muralists of the turn or of the early 20th century, and then they applied it to the public spaces of the Northeast LA that they moved into Northeast LA. They were among the pioneers in the 90s. Zach de la Rocha, son of Beto de la Rocha, one of Los Four, one of the main muralists of the 1970s, he established his own art center called Regeneración. And here in this photo is Tom Morello, his guitarist, playing at Regeneración. After the Latinx artists white artists came back to the Arroyo, that the earlier Latinx pioneers, they emboldened white artists to come back. They called their new collective the Arroyo Arts Collective. They live in many of these fine craftsmen's homes that were built, and they have these discovery tours where in effect, they open up their homes to a kind of arts tourism where people not only buy the art that's there, but they get to see the great architecture of these arts and crafts homes. That Kathy Milligan, who owns this glass studio, she kind of epitomizes what I see to be a kind of revival of the Arroyo crafts, because she blows glass by hand, and she offers workshops in the back of her studio. She sells in the front of her studio. She's a woman versus a man, and she is the main promoter of the NELA Arts Second Saturdays, so that arts tourism has many faces among the artists of and the creative classes of Northeast LA. We move on to a Japanese American woman named Amy Inouye, who has a future studio, and she's been involved with trying to place brand Northeast LA as like a small town on the old Route 66, because the old Route 66 does run through Northeast LA. And apart from the white artists, that this is the longest running Latinx art my gallery, Avenue 50 Studio. They champion the street arts. They bring new credibility to muralism, to graffiti arts, to tattoo arts. And apart from espousing ideals of social change, there is a harkening back to the past, looking at the Native American ancestry of the Latinx peoples. Murals in the high schools, murals out in the streets, murals out commemorating protests against Proposition 187, and that all of that occurs during the revitalization phase of the stage model, that creative class workers can actually promote social change, help to foment community development. At the same time, they also promote place branding, and that art, it can be a tool of social change, but it can easily be a tool for economic development and then later gentrification. And what we find in Northeast LA in the 2000s is that first the transit line comes in, and the transit line becomes a spur to further gentrification. It also shows you how the state comes in and can be a tool also to stimulate gentrification. There is a recession between 07 and 09, which kind of interrupts that, but the foreclosure market during the recession brings in all these speculator flippers. And then we get this, this condition of neoliberal urbanism, where you get the rollback of Fortis-era freeway housing and social programs and the roll out of public incentives for private housing investment, mass transit systems. And then the state, we find, trying to stimulate creative economy, creative class newcomers to these kinds of communities through small lot development, through transit-oriented development, or TOD. And this is fomented real displacement pressures and an anti-gentrification movement among the new Latinx classes, some of whom we can find among artists in the creative class. This is an example of small lot subdivision. You take a small lot and then you knock down a smaller home, and then you put up these multi-level homes where even the garages, the cars are stacked because there's only so much room in Los Angeles. And this particular company, Moda Teeth, is so well known for this around Los Angeles. They have projects named, if you name bento box, those yes, those nice little sushi boxes where everything is compact, and Formosa Fusion. The Highland Park Transit Village was also planned, and an illustration of transit-oriented development, and that was, even though we need more affordable housing, and we need more housing in general in Northeast LA, the small business community was very suspicious of this kind of high-density transit-oriented development. Their concern was that the affordable housing being promised would not be as affordable as was promised, and that it would take away parking lots, which are important for the small business community. So they hired a land use attorney named Dean Waldress that has been hired throughout Los Angeles in these cases against high density development. And basically they were able to overturn this project and send the city and developer back to the drawing board. It kind of addresses a quandary in Los Angeles and other high density cities that are trying to get higher density. How do you create more housing and more affordable housing at the same time while being sensitive to gentrification trends? And basically these people were saying, you know, you need more environmental impact review, you need more community input and participation. And now in another project nearby, the Gold Line, the transit station, is the Marmion Royal, another multi-unit apartment building that was bought up by actually smaller developers, but they were developers. They own multiple units around Los Angeles, and a rent strike was organized by the Northeast Los Angeles Alliance, and their protests in Los Angeles made it to the front page of the LA Times beginning in 2014. And this rent strike was ultimately unsuccessful. The people were displaced, but through their many protests in which they protest in the streets to evict displacement, that they complained that gentrification is the new colonialism. And through these nighttime protests, they even walk around with computer projectors, projecting on the walls of businesses, housing is a human right. This is on the front page of the LA Times. And what it did is help to promote a citywide discourse on the growing gentrification in communities around LA, in Little Tokyo, in Chinatown, in Boyle Heights, in Echo Park. You know, it earlier happened in Venice, that these new movements have an artistic quality, that they include nighttime processions. That's this nighttime procession. They're acting like Joseph and Mary on Christmas Eve, going around looking for housing, that they have this greedy landlord puppet, that even when they're finally evicted from the Marmion Royal, that is memorialized, because it's the concept here that art is helping them to mitigate the trauma of mass displacement of families from multi-family displaced buildings. And that some of them even wear masks, and you know, as they protest down the streets, because by wearing masks and associating themselves with the animals of Northeast LA and the Native American past, what they're saying is they're honoring the landscape. Now, in Northeast LA, where the arts have actually been part of the process of social change, we go to Boyle Heights, where in the gentrification process of the last 2 years, we've seen anti-gentrification protests against art galleries.
Wow.
That they define the art as white art, that they're seeking to defend Boyle Heights even in the pandemic period, and that they even protested coffee shops, like this coffee shop called Weird Wave, which was partially Latinx owned. And there is popularly known in Los Angeles the term gentrification, gente meaning people in Spanish, essentially saying that even Latinx middle class and arts galleries and coffee shops can be part of the gentrification process. Finally, then, what do we make of all of this? That to understand these new Latinx anti-gentrification movements within the failure of creative class-driven urban policy, that if we look at the neighborhood life cycle of the Latinx experience, Latinx artists and people coming out of East LA in the 60s and the 70s were moving into a city that was opening up to them. Art was part of social change. Art was part of their politics. But now, 50 years later, in the gentrification period of the urban history cycle, we find them protesting the arts, seeing the arts not as a vehicle of social change, but a tool of political or a tool of economic change. They see art galleries as like suspicious Trojan horses of gentrification. At the same time, in Northeast LA, we found that sometimes the artists use the arts as a vehicle for anti-gentrification protests. And finally, you know, what do we do about this? How can we have a more enlightened, creative, class-driven urban policy? And there is attention to the Fruitvale transit station in Oakland, where they used mass transit, used transit-oriented development, but they worked closely with a local community development corporation, with Black leaders, with Black artists, and this could be seen as a demonstration project, an inclusionary transit-oriented development. And finally, that with the pandemic, there is ongoing attention to how the pandemic affects the continuing difficulties of marginalized communities to deal with gentrification pressures and their economic and social marginalization. And with that, thank you, and I turn things over to Rachel. Okay.
Great. Rachel, I have a question, and Jen, do you want to talk about, do people have any immediate questions? Because I know Rachel's going to go and bring us to a whole nother level. So I wanted to make sure that we were able to handle any of the questions that Professor Lin has brought up. So do people have any questions about this, and we can have a general discussion at the end?
Can you hear me? I have headphones on.
Thank you. Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I was wondering, in Pittsburgh, which is where I live, there was a big sort of discussion about this summer with Black Lives Matter, that murals were being made by white artists. And people, you know, while I'm sure it was well intentioned, and the art was of different Black, locally and nationally Black people who had been killed by the police. People were upset that the artists were white, and that caused like a lot of tension as people were trying to unite around the movement. And I was wondering if you heard similar things in LA about like white people taking over or co-opting Black and Latin social movements.
Yeah, I think that concept of the appropriation is very strong. I was at a conference earlier last year there was a presenter from Denver that was showing how now for white tourists going into the inner city, the new idea is to do this kind of Instagram thing that you pose next to a mural and you show, you know, the real grit of going into the inner city. and that if you're not consuming it, that some of the artists that are hired for these things are not from these same kinds of communities. At the same time, you have these other more informal murals on the sides of many businesses in Northeast LA, so that at the same time that there's this appropriation of the minority arts, there's also the erasure of many of the more informal kind of public arts projects that is part of. So both erasure and appropriation. So yeah, I think you're really onto something there.
Please,
And
another comment or two, please, go ahead. Elena?
Yes, hi. So I just put my question in the chat, but you showed a slide where it's clear that the Latinx population has increased in both neighborhoods. So I was trying to understand, is it the case that there are a lot of whites now trying to move in since 2010 and gentrify the neighborhoods? That's my question.
Right. So between 2000 and 2010, the census shows incremental increase in whites. But of course, the Great Recession happened towards the end of that 2010 period. So I think that with the 2020 census, it's probably going to be a more rapid acceleration. And so white populations have been moving back in. At the same time, when I was looking at the 2000 to 2010 data, I found that the Latin population did not fall as much as one thought it might. And through looking at the structure of families, I was able to determine that what's happening is there are some Latin type populations that are part of the new wave of newcomers, but they tend to be more non-family. That is either unmarried or not, or no children yet. And so I think that corresponds with some of the other literature out there on the demographic aspects of gentrification. But yes, whites are, the white populations are increasing, and non-family households also that are part of what we may popularly call the creative class.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I have a question. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the very last point you hit on, which is the impact of the pandemic on gentrification.
Right.
What have you seen? I know it's as raw as can be, but what have you seen in Northeast LA?
Yeah, I think that, you know, many of the small businesses are really hurt. In survey work I did, even going back to 2000, I found that many of the businesses were not only just Latinx owned, but many of them were women owned. These smaller little gift shops, and that they've continued to have trouble, that although they have various kinds of eviction protection, we've seen those, that those eviction protections have been kind of timed out. And I think there's continuing problems that the pandemic brings just because of the economic downturn. Whether there's a special racial component, I think we can say that, well, these racially marginalized communities were already hurting, so that I think that they're just hurt more. But I haven't been out there doing the new research in terms of interviewing, so that this would be based upon what I suspect is happening. And whether that corresponds with what you suspected, I might be kind of curious, but that's what I think.
Hillary, did you have a question?
Yeah, if it's okay.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Jan, I seem to recall being down by the river in Northeast LA, where there are a lot of homeless encampments along the river.
Yes.
And, homelessness is a very serious problem right now in LA.
Yes, right.
And I wonder how working class resistance to new development contributes to the overall macro problem in the city of insufficient new housing development.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
this is a problem, you know, in many of the West Coast cities, that you're not building enough compared to the population growth. And people are coming to, I mean, you just have a lot of homelessness in LA. They can't all live in Skid Row.
Right. Yeah, I think that's such a good point, that apart from Skid Row, the no man's lands near the river have historically been a place for the homeless. The Arroyo Seco that goes through Northeast LA is a principal tributary of the LA River. So at the convergence point, we've seen some of the largest encampments that are by the river. And then they go all the way up the Arroyo. And what they found about those homeless people is some of them could be going to shelters, but there's something about the sense of neighborhood that they have, that the type of cooperation that they have, that's reproducing what they have in these households, childcare and looking after your stuff, so that even though some of these encampments can be an eyesore, that can then promote plans for clearance, which accelerated during this period of accelerated gentrification in the early and mid 2010s, so that what we had was the clearance of those people. And so so what is the solution? Well, the solution is, well, you need a larger enlightened affordable housing policy, including an affordable housing trust fund, and taking monies from developers, putting it in those trust funds and trying to build more affordable housing. But then the people in Northeast LA and even the LAPD would say, well, it's too bad we gotta clear these people, but they seem to know each other. And what can be a more compassionate policy towards the homeless? That's not an easy answer, But one thing they did is they didn't have money for a permanent homeless shelter. At least some of the churches opened up wintertime homeless shelters. And there's not a lot of snow, but there's a lot of rain in Los Angeles. So yeah, you need a broader citywide policy, and then you need smaller policies in the neighborhoods to actually compassionately deal with the homeless. But that was a good question. Yeah, I hope I answered it.
No, very good question. Any more questions before we get on to Rachel? I have your PowerPoint. You sent it. Yay, it worked.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Excellent, excellent.
Okay.
Really great
Yeah.
discussions. I'm really proud.
Okay.
Really
I'll
proud.
turn off mine.
All right, let me get my thing up and going. Here we go. Rachel, this is hot off the press, right?
It's not. I just sent the index in, so it's.
Tell everyone what happened last week. I love the process because you're teaching us all. Just tell us the process of what you were doing last week with this book.
I finally left my house for like the first time since March. I ventured to my sister bought a beach house in New Jersey. So I ventured here, and then of course the publisher's like, okay, we need all the edits done in a week. And I was like, okay. So they sent the galleys, and I had to get them back in a week. And then as soon as it was the index. It was just, you know how it is. Turnaround is like a week, basically.
I love it.
And so I was doing that. I was doing a bunch of ASA stuff. I thought I could host from my computer, but my kids had disabled a bunch of stuff on my computer, and I didn't know that until the time to host. So that was kind of embarrassing for giving a talk on digital notes. I was on the verge of tears, but I kept it together.
Keep it together. So love to here we go. Let's go for it. We're here.
Okay. Before I start, I really want to thank Chip. George's nickname is Chip. I really want to thank you so much for just being. You can just tell you haven't lived your whole life in academia from the way that you responded and adapted to things very quickly. So thank you. Just so much thank you to Chip. And I before I start, just want to plug ASA's Community and Urban section. Make sure you keep your membership current. If you have ideas about connecting over the year, contact Derek. We can make that happen. Let's just stay together over the course of the year, okay? We missed you guys this year.
Oh.
I just want to say that to everyone. Okay, so this is like my big project I've been working on since my sabbatical a couple of years ago with my co-author and my spouse, Robert Litchfield. And this section, at the time that we planned this session, we had 2 other panelists. So I've made this presentation a little bit longer to fill up that. I had planned to fill up that time, but I can move through things faster. It doesn't really matter. And this is our book, Digital Nomads: In Search of Freedom, Community, and Meaningful Work in the New Economy. At the time we started this, almost nobody knew what remote work was. Actually, in January, almost nobody knew what remote work was. My department couldn't use Zoom to save its life. And now here we are. So hopefully this is more relevant than ever. Okay, so I'm gonna start. Oop.
You might have to tell me.
Oh, okay, you can move to the next slide. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted, at the time I thought I was giving like an introduction to who I was, but this is who I am. I study different things about communities, how communities change, adapt, what dynamics mean for community members and stakeholders. I'm interested in community quality of life, attachment, perceptions of community crime and disorder. My department has like 800 criminology majors, so I teach a lot about, I teach a course on The Wire, I teach juvenile delinquency, I teach a lot of crim kinds of intersections of Black community crime, disorder, segregation. Inequality in housing, urban redevelopment and gentrification, aging in place, white and Black flight from cities. I have some work with a colleague on unmarried fathers, creative classwork with grad students, and now this book. And now I'm currently doing some things on COVID and families of incarcerees, and on the intersections of trauma and people who live in public housing. I'm trying to become more trauma informed, something I really am now understanding how much I did not know when I was doing my previous work. So it's so interesting. This is just a shout out to like next year's organizers for ASA. So much has to be done now on revisiting our old work in light of what's been going on in our country and with policing Black neighborhoods. Okay, so today's talk, for something completely different, digital nomads. First, I'm just going to tell you what they are, since most people don't know. Digital nomads are people with mobile work lives. So actually, as of now, some of you may be digital nomads, except you can't travel. And now you can see why this isn't like what we were talking about, because being confined to your home against your will isn't really being a digital nomad, right? This is like the worst form of remote work, what we're doing right now. This is a more ideal situation. They use their freedom to become what they call location independent. So they sell or store their possessions, and then they leave them. They leave home to travel and live as they please. So we have people, for instance, who've quit jobs at Google, Facebook, Under Armour, Toomey Luggage, Arsenal Football. You know, a lot of amazing companies, and they've quit that 9-to-5 sort of situation they have. And any one destination might be temporary, so they could stay in one place for a long period of time, but many view it as a lifestyle that's a long-term choice. So they don't have a plan B to come back home and resume and buy a house and get married and have kids and all that kind of stuff. This is what they see as like the future. Oh, next slide, please.
Can everyone put themselves on mute, please? I know there's like 2 people, and I know I can't do it with my screen share. Thank you.
Okay, so this is 70 semi-structured interviews, and 36 of the interviewees were women, plus, which is unusual because a lot of people think this is sort of a bro-y thing, especially in Thailand. Men are attracted to Thailand for various reasons, but Bali is a space with a lot of women entrepreneurs. So about half our sample was women, hundreds of face-to-face interactions through our fieldwork in the digital nomad hub of Bali, Indonesia. Our informants, and this is a picture of one of the co-working spaces. Nobody uses that pool, ever. Okay, that's just like, so you know you can use it, but you're not going to use it because you're working. So these are the countries everyone was from in our interview sample. Of course, we talked to many more people than we formally interviewed, but this is who we interviewed. Okay, next slide. This is a cover from the New York Times magazine a while back. It looks like 2018. So I always start off with, I'm obsessed with why people live where they do. That's like always my first thing I love to ask people as a nosy sociologist. So where does the fantasy of the creative class city go wrong? I live in Pittsburgh, where Richard Florida used to be. I have heard, my last book was about New York. I'm very interested in the mythology of cities as these sort of perfect places to live, and this sort of neoliberalism of this creative class city marketing, especially like where I live right now, is a very hot topic. Because Pittsburgh's been considered one of the worst places in the country for Black people to live. So how do those two things go together? So where does the fantasy of the creative class city go wrong? So let's move to the next slide. All right, so this is the argument. It's intended as economic development policy. It's highly influential. If you've ever tried to get in contact with Richard Florida, you'll know he's like a superstar influencer, futuristic sort of intersection of business and planning person, and it's highly influential. There's this awareness now. Everyone knows about the creative class in many cities. They know about talent clustering. There's an awareness now of what makes a place inviting or so-called livable. There's a lot of amenity-based planning and placemaking, so talking about bike paths and green spaces and things like that. However, there are also criticisms. And I mentioned a couple of these: neoliberalism, trickle-down economics logic, increasing urban income equality, housing affordability issues, displacement of poor and communities of color, especially at least in Pittsburgh, Black people, and then creative class workers report. This is sort of a lot about our project, but you don't hear a lot about the micro level things around the creative class. But if you actually talk to creative class workers, many of them report a lot of dissatisfaction with their lives. And that's a lot about what our book is about. Okay, next slide. So here are what we see as the themes around push factors. This is Dennis, age 32, Ellie, age 33, and Vance, age 43. One of the reasons, the creative class city is just too expensive, okay? So one of the reasons to leave Paris was I felt there was no room for my dreams, actually, because you put too much energy into actually living there. You live there, you work there, you work to live there. It's kind of an endless curse. Now, obviously, that's very dramatic, very French, but the idea of, you're working so hard to live in this place and you have no time for anything but work. Ellie says, in London, the cost of living is obscene. The cost of property is rising at an alarming rate, fueled by Chinese and Russian money, like a lot of big cities. Looking at the old guys, and I think she means people my age, I'm 47, looking at the old guys, she basically told me that, they don't have enough money. This isn't a very exciting prospect, is it? So having the people around you at work being my age, and they're supposed to be your mentors, and all they do is complain about their own lives, and they still don't have enough money. A lot of complaints about like who their mentors are and how they don't want to be like them. Vance, age 43. I realize I've got this well-paying job in London, but the cost that comes with it, as in the London lifestyle, means it's not so profitable, because you're like, I'm earning the money, but it's like all the money I'm earning is going into the lifestyle. Okay, so that's a major theme across many of the people we spoke to. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, creative. Okay, so here, no, this one is really interesting. So-called creative work is actually unfulfilling. And if you look at Richard Florida's ideas of what constitutes creative work, he calls a lot of things creative work. So here's Liam, age 32. The job was quite grueling. That's applicable to many jobs in these companies. I believe, can't recall, I think he's someone that worked at Google in Dublin. They hire very smart people, but they get you to do really awful stuff, and they just compensate it through the culture being great. It wasn't time to be creative, it was all operational. Next, Lonnie, and she's a fashion designer. And she lived in New York. I definitely felt I signed up for a creative position and I was not allowed to be creative at all. A lot of people had to sign off. People have this idea that it's such a cool job and you're so lucky to work there. And I would design something and it would be so different by the time it hit the floor. And then Nicole, age 26. At first it was cool, but eventually I got really, really bored. I also couldn't understand why, and this is so important right now with remote work, why I had to be there in the office. I had a blog at some point. I love to work, but I don't love to pretend that I work. And so many people, I mean, it's so interesting how many people talked about being bored, not understanding if their work's done, why they have to be there, especially people in their 20s and 30s. And then so many people had blogs, so many people just described that they wanted to move ahead and learn new skills and do new things, but they couldn't because their workplace wasn't like that. And actually, if you talk to people my age, when I would tell them these stories, they would say, yeah, work's like that. Like you just sit around doing nothing for the last 3 hours. Why are they complaining? They're getting a check. And I'm like, okay. It's just so interesting what we've been socialized to accept and how younger people think that's crazy, you know. Push factor 3, you can't take advantage of the amenities anyway. Pauline says, I think that New York is kind of like the battle of the busiest. And so she describes how she has no time to do anything. And she just works all week and then does laundry and then white knuckles it for the following week. Dara, for 43, I was like, well, where's my prize, my happiness, my fulfillment, my satisfaction, my love, my connection, my joy? Where is it? Why am I spending $1,000 a week on clothes? Why am I having to drink every night? A lot of people who are in sales talk about drinking. Why am I acting like a crazy person, making sure I'm networked with everybody who I could possibly network with? And then why am I exhausted? And that's also a huge issue for women is the networking, so much focus on networking. Drea, 30. You haven't got time to enjoy them. I basically spent my 20s just working pretty much. Like I couldn't make plans with friends in the evening. I try to make plans to meet them at 7 or 7:30, even right by my office, like in the same area of the tube stop as my office. I'd have to cancel. You can think you're going to be fine. I'm definitely going to be out of here at 6:30, and you're there till midnight.
Right.
I know, right? Okay, so then the question becomes, fine, so those are the reasons you don't like where you are. What are the pull factors? What's the alternative to a creative class city? So if these places aren't working for you, where can you go? And what will pull you? What kind of place are you looking for? Why can't you just move from Pittsburgh or from New York to Pittsburgh, right? That's what Pittsburgh is asking. You don't like New York? Come to Pittsburgh, and this is their answer. What are the pull factors? Okay, and that's a co-working space. These 3 pictures are co-working spaces. You see, you leave your shoes outside. There's like literally a monkey in the open air, you know, co-working space. There's mountains. So this is the setting. It's Bali, which is considered a digital nomad hub. This is from the BBC. Silicon Valley meets Silicon Bali. For years now, experts have been predicting that with ever-increasing internet speeds and improving video communications and technologies, the future of work will involve more telecommuting and working from home. Bali's tech scene participants champion the inspiring scenery. These workers say they can be location independent because of fast internet speeds available in far-flung locales, as well as growing acceptance from clients that work can and will get done, whether it's from a skyscraper in Manhattan or a bungalow in Bermuda. So it's more output-based and not about just sitting there, not just sitting there all day being monitored. Okay, next slide, please. All right, and so this is the beginning of the marketing, and it was interesting hearing Jan talk about like Instagrammers, because that's a huge part of our culture now, is documenting and showing off your lifestyle, right? So this is the marketing. You can see this is one area. It says silence and concentration. So you're marketing this as a place where you can get, as the millennials and Gen Z, get shit done, GSD. And then welcome to co-working, community, collaboration. So it's not about working from home in this bedroom or walk-in closet. It's about being with other people who are inspiring you. So work tourism is a new niche market of place branding aimed at consumers who want to reimagine their work and their work identities in the context of a leisure travel experience. So it's not working at Starbucks, right? It's working and being with other people and trying to change how you see yourself and your skill set. Bottom-up place branding. Remote working enthusiasts and entrepreneurs initiate campaigns and adapt place-based tourist infrastructures to create and promote remote working communities. And even some governments now are trying to have digital nomad visas, for instance. They're realizing that there's a critical mass of people who are working remotely. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here are the pull factors. What are we selling you? Magic, nature, culture, spirit, the Balinese. Barb32, she's has an internet company. She's the CEO. Environment is quite important to me. What inspires me? What makes me feel good? More one with nature. I wanted to live in a big city, but very quickly after moving there, I realized like, wow, I'm so glad I don't, because then I'd go and visit friends in New York and I'm like, this is too stressful. Travis, he's the owner of a co-working space. Why Bali? Because Bali is magic. Bali has been attracting writers, artists, and other creatives for hundreds of years as a place to go and be inspired. It has a very long artistic culture. It's just something that's like art is there. Carol, 37. Bali just has something about it, the way that religion and culture is just so integrated. There's something very special. It's a mysterious island that lures you in. I love Bali because it's such a spiritual place. Okay. Pull factor 2, you're selling that it's practical. When I say practical, I mean they have the infrastructure to work, so you won't be kicked off Wi-Fi all the time and stuff. And it's also just very cheap. And if you're interested in that subject, the 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss talks about geo arbitrage and making Western dollars and spending them down in other countries, which is obviously a form of another form of, it's like neocolonialism, basically. Okay, so Tessa says, and Tessa used to work on the Obama campaign before she moved here. There's a lot of expats here. It's not just teaching. If you want tacos or gluten-free pasta, I can get it. I'm not roughing it. So it's comfortable. Vance, 43. The salary world, it's just a struggle to have the lifestyle you want, and technology allows people to live in different, cheaper places. I was sitting in a co-working space in London and I saw an advert. Why don't you work at Ubud in Bali? And I was like, hang on, yeah, why don't I? Because it's like 20% of the cost. Nicholas, we're 100 meters from the beach. It's 130 times faster than any other connection around here. And it's 100% uptime all the time, 24/7. People need to work and they need to focus. I think the community just decides when it needs to interact. The barbecue is a catch-all event, members only. We charge them 100 rupiah, $8. It's a general free beer the whole night. So they're trying to show you that, they're trying to explain that there's already things in place. So if you're afraid of going to Asia or traveling by yourself, it's all set up for you so you can have a nice soft landing. Okay, next.
Wow, this is.
Oh, I know, you're gonna move, right, Chip?
Wow.
Okay, so, so pull factor 3, selling, and this is the community part, selling a fluid but intimate community. And this is what really violates a lot of urban sociology concepts. Travis, it was working, but I was totally lonely. Here, I was all by myself, a free man, independent, post-community guy, and I was totally lonely. Ubud became the clubhouse for the digital nomad community. We're social creatures, full stop. We interact, we're introverted or extroverted. We have different ways of feeling connection, but I don't think most people like feeling lonely. Linda, she was a content person for various celebrities in London. There's just this constant stream of people going in and out. So if you're someone who makes friends easily, and it's easy to do here, it's almost like basically done for you. I basically came back and there's 4 or 5 new people that had come in the interim and who are now friends with all my friends. And I was like, these are my new friends. It's almost like I felt like they're my best friends after 2 days. Rebecca, 29. This community aspect is enormous. You're around like-minded people trying to have these massive, aspirational, independently driven goals. Being around that, not only having accountability buddies, but attending skill shares and think tanks and being inspired by other people's progress. It's fueling you up while you're fueling them up. It's a beautiful cycle of creativity. Next slide. Finally, how do they form community? And this is where I sort of go into some of the older literature on, idealizing and also demonizing technology's effects on individuals and communities. This obviously, we're hearing a ton of this. Every other New York Times article is about this. Very frustrating oversimplification. It's also talking about selective migration. Instead of focusing on people's characteristics, demographic characteristics, we talk a lot about selective migration by values. So maybe it's a certain kind of person that you want to be around. And it's not as much, I mean, it obviously overlaps with demographics, but it's more than that. And then talking about fluidity and intimacy in the nomad community. It's very different because usually you think about long-term face-to-face social ties as fostering community, and transience is supposed to work against community. And so we explore that in this question. Next slide. Okay, so here are the values. I want to sort of focus a little bit on, and this is a sign at one of the co-working spaces, get remotivated. These are the values. So you may think, for instance, in your sociology department, people might assume, oh, you guys have all the same values. You're in sociology. No, I'm sure we've all realized that in the last year. That's not true, or even more. Here you have really, really defined values that are agreed upon. The number one value is freedom. Next is personal development. So a lot of what I've just talked about, there are probably some people in this group who are rolling their eyes and saying, oh my God, this is so woo-woo, and this is so business speak, this is so The Secret, this is so magic, and they don't want to hear that stuff. But these people do like that. They're not going to make fun of you if you've read a personal development book and you're trying to do it. If you're journaling, if you're taking Kundalini yoga and doing breath work or whatever, they're not going to mock you for that. They're happy for you to grow in whichever way you want to. A big value of sharing and helping and making time to do that. A big value, this is really different from sociology, positivity. So, it's really, really frowned upon to be negative. So if you picture a grad student coming up to you and giving you an outrageous idea for a thesis, and how many of us have turned them down and said that's a stupid idea or whatever. Now this group of people will say it could work, let me hear more, that kind of thing. And a big focus on hustle, which is just, you've got to make it happen. What are you doing to make this dream come true? A lot of language around hustle. And then another big one that's different from creative class studies is minimalism. So you don't need stuff, you don't need an apartment, you don't need furniture, you don't need a house, you don't need a car, you might not need kids and a wife or a husband, and just focusing on what's the bare minimum, and how if you can cut everything else out, you could stay focused on your dream. Next slide. And then I'm just talking about this new kind of community where you normalize fluidity instead of lamenting that people aren't in the office and can't we just get back to normal after COVID and all be at work all the time? That's the kind of thing I hear. Even right now, I just had a 2-hour faculty meeting and people were like, oh, isn't it a shame we have to meet like this? And I was like, no. Not really at all, But so how can we normalize fluidity, and how can we build intimacy? And so here are some quotes about that. We all say how we have to have conversations that we can't have with people back home, because you call your friends at home and they're asking you all these questions that you don't have the answers to quite yet. But your friends in this community, they know what it's like to say, I don't know. They know what it's like to say, I'm not sure when I'm going back home. They understand if you have to all of a sudden go back home, then there's no shame, there's no guilt. So, things might fail, like your business might collapse and you might have to go home, and that's part of business, you fail. Fluidity, so part of fluidity is that there are these rites of departure and arrival. When you leave, when you come back, there are co-working space events that center around departure and arrival, and these soft landing packages to make sure you're okay when you arrive. And then to compensate for the fluidity, you have very meaningful, intimate conversations. So informal norms include stopping by someone when they're working and actually just saying to them, what are you working on? And then listening to them. Rituals. There's a lot of rituals around telling your story. I'm sure you had it up to here with like storytelling, self-help TED Talks and stuff like that. But this is a really big part of their culture is you've moved someplace, you don't know anyone, people want to hear, why did you come here? And it validates their reason for doing that as well. So it escalates ties, it signals vulnerability because you're talking about a weakness you had, and it encourages other people to do the same, and then they tell you their story, and then you're affirming each other's stories. Next. Just conclusions. I just want to say place matters even to digital natives. So even to people who are highly, highly digital, they want to be together in person, but it has to be sort of a no strings attached, you know, no commitments, like-minded attachment. Push factors stem from the failures of top-tier cities. So top-tier cities are not what people make them out to be, whatever the arguments are on a macro level for the economy. And then digital nomad hubs can represent a new kind of community, one where work and community are merged, but not on a company level, like your university's like, we're a family and we're a community, but one where it's voluntary and you're working separately but together. Next slide, please. And this is just like what I've been, just like things I'm working on right now. Just because I thought I was going to be introducing myself to people who I didn't know as much, but yeah, that's it. That's my presentation.
Well, lots of stuff in there. I know we have
very micro level presentation today, but yeah.
I know we have lots of questions on this.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's jump in. We have like half an hour, so let's jump in and just have Okay, Hillary, go for it.
Rachel, this is really interesting.
I know, I was just like, whoa. I'm gonna save my question for the end. I have a couple questions too.
Your reaction to ballet is almost the polar opposite of mine, which is that it's sort of Miami Beach with a lot more French people. One of the things is the lifestyle that you're describing is probably true. Well, I'll come back to the gig worker and the extent to which these are gig workers, but which they are, because that's what allows them to move on. Yeah. Right. You know, Bali, it's in Indonesia. I mean, and it's the only Hindu part of Indonesia to make it even more special. It's like, it's resorts. And these are people who are at cheap, you know, who are living like natives, the native serving class, and enjoying the lifestyle of the really super rich who are at the resorts. So to say, that, you know, it's a little bit like colonialism, I don't know how else to put it, which is to say that most of the people who are Balinese natives, you know, they're working in these hotels and cleaning the swimming pools that are actually on the beach, and the topless parties and oh yeah, I mean, it's quite a scene town. And there are creative class towns with a lot of artists and mostly selling their art to tourists who come through and so on. So very much like what Jan was describing. So depending on where on the island you go, now of course if you go into the jungle or the north of the island, it's very different, where the volcano is and all that. But the area that you're studying is probably some part of Bali where, you know, the lifestyle is relatively cheap, partly because there's a service class nearby to work in these high-end resorts. So the amenities are there and they benefit from that, but it's also partly, you know, they're interlopers too on the natives. So it's something to keep in mind, I think, when we talk about these folks as they're nomads, but they're also having a gentrifying effect in some of the native towns. So
yeah, I mean, it's a tourism, you know, Bali's economy is tourism. And so if you talk to Balinese, you know, because we had our children with us, we spent a lot of time with Balinese people, and they don't like to talk, you know, their culture is very different from ours. They don't like to talk about negative things, like bad karma and things like that. But many people would prefer to work in tourism than to work agriculture. Agriculture is extremely difficult,
Right.
and they're picking rice all day, and they're under hot sun, and it's not fun. They're not interacting with tourists who sometimes buy them things and take them out with them and stuff like that, go on excursions. But yeah, it's a tourist economy without a doubt. And the thing is, the people who are nomads really view themselves as different from your Australian tourist that comes there and gets loaded and goes to resorts, because they think of themselves as savvy travelers. They care about the country, they care about local people, they are working, and they're in a co-working space. Now they're obviously segregated in their own way, obviously, as Western creative class workers. But they don't view themselves as the same as, even as us. Like, for instance, I didn't drive on a scooter with my children, which is like a very big nomad. It's a way to show, it's a way to sort of signal that you're a world traveler, is that you're comfortable on a scooter, even with your children. And we had a driver, and we paid him, and he picked us up. He lived on our street with and they thought that was oh no, you need to kind of let go and stop being so Western and don't be so afraid all the time. So even that difference, they have different markers that show that they're more comfortable and more acclimated to the culture there, and that they separate themselves from your sort of stereotypical resort people. Of course, there's overlap, and that's in their own mind, some of it. But yeah. And also, in terms of creativity, they view web design as creativity, not just making jewelry and pots and things like that.
We have a lot of questions, Rachel.
Oh, okay, go ahead. I'm super long-winded, so just cut me off.
All right. And I have one of my mentees is on, Kalu. He works with the creative class. He's 29 are you now, Kalu? But I plan to get you in, so be ready. So
I'm in my 30s now, Chip.
Oh my Lord, I'm getting old, everybody. I can't believe it. But I'm gonna come to you in a few, but please, Elena, can you go next, and then Leonard?
Yes. Rachel, hi. It's such a great work. Such a great work. Thank you for sharing it with us. Yeah, there are really millions of questions, but I just wanted to make a really short comment first, and then I'll posit my question. But my comment is that the unsatisfaction with work that you cited kind of in the beginning, people finding it really hard to live in the city because it's so expensive. It's not really only related to creative professions. It's I think it's a pretty universal issue, and I think now people are saying that particularly in New York City after COVID, we may see actually the prices fall down a little bit in terms of real estate. So perhaps it'll, one of the more positive effects, maybe actually the city will become more affordable to people to live in, but we shall see about that. So my question is more about who are these people? Are they, what kind of jobs do they have? Are they mostly single? I have a feeling that these are mostly single people. I mean, what they have families. Just if you can just speak a little more about their characteristics and that in that sense. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think the median age was, I want to say 33.
Sounds right.
Mostly they're single, although there were people who were married, there were people with kids. Mostly they're single. I've listed the countries. I would say, one of the big differences, just going back to what you said, Elena, is that unlike regular people who live in the city, I think these people mainly moved to these cities. They were sold on this image of going to New York and Sex in the City and that kind of thing. And I think the mismatch between what they thought it was going to be like, and then 10 years later when they're so they're 22 and they go work for Puma in New York, and now they're 32, and it's 10 years in and they're done. They don't want to go out anymore. They don't want to be a PR person on call 24 hours a day. And like people my age will say like, okay, you know, like suck it up, like, you know, do your time. Like you're burnt out, you're 32. It's like, well, it is 10 years. I mean, how much longer do they have to do it, you know? So I think that some of it is about their expectations of what this life was going to be, and they were grinding, and now they're 10 years later, and they still aren't, they're left, you know, with very negative feelings about their prospects and for happiness if they keep going and just keep taking the next thing presented to them at work. But I think one of the big things that makes them really different from, let's say, someone like me, in addition to my age, is just I had never left the country till I was 30. My parents didn't go to college. I'm very working class background. Almost everyone there has traveled. They traveled when they were very young. And unlike Americans, because our sample only has some Americans in it, people from other countries travel. You know, they go on vacation. In America, we have like Florida. We have, you know, we have a lot of different climates here. It's a huge country, so we visit our families. People in other countries tend to have passports and travel and go places at younger ages, and they are affected by those experiences, and it opens their minds to the idea, you know, that memory sort of lingers, and they have this sort of kind of like a FOMO, remembering that time. Like my memories are going to Boca Raton, to Century Village, where my grandma lived. That's not something I'm trying to recreate in my 30s, right? But they're remembering that like year off after college when they traveled, and so that experience is something that really, some people had family who worked for airlines, for instance, or they had parents from different countries, so they traveled to different countries that way. Bali's far from us, but it's not far from other places necessarily for some people. So that's a pretty big difference. I would say that's like a universal difference, is this idea of having an early childhood travel experience that has had a lingering effect on them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. We got Leonard, then Kalu, then Yuki.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all. Sorry, I'm a little under the weather. So, and this is the first time I've been able to go to a lunchtime session and eat politely. So for that. Silver linings. Yeah, great presentations. I'm puzzling in a good way over what issues that Rachel and Jan presented show a failure of the creative class. Because in many ways they've documented the ongoing dynamism and adaptations of a dominant economic class to transform space in their image. I was struck by this awesome quote from one of Rachel's informants. I think it was like that at their horrible job, they get you to do awful stuff and compensate it through the culture. And I got to type that out in the chat because I read this as like, you know, culture with a capital. Oops, I did that to culture with the capital C and a trademark, because, you know, this person just sounds so derogatory about it. They sound so alienated and blasé about something that you can imagine, you know, when they got the job, it was pitched to them as like a good, like our corporate culture was so good. And they're, you know, reaching the limits of their satisfaction with that. And so they make this move. And I sort of was wondering if you saw sort of a larger connection, and Jan, I'd be interested in, you know, you jumping in here too. You know, whether informants like these, whether they're referring to what they were promised in terms of the enchantment of work or the enchantment of urban authenticity. There seems to be a failure in the satisfactions that those modes of labor and social reproduction are supposed to provide the creative class. So, you know, my question is like, do you think these are breakdowns? And if so, what do they, at least on their face, have to do with urban space? The consequences for places are pretty clear, and you're telling two important stories, but are these larger issues than just sort of, you know, local stories about choosing geography.
Yeah, go Jen.
You have to unmute, Jan.
Unmute time, unmute time. There you go.
So my group was a group of exiles, that is the white gentrifiers, fleeing the mass culture of the suburbs. That's what I would interpret that as. Yes, they're going to a transitioning inner city area in search of all that kind of authenticity and neo-bohemian culture and the amenities, whereas it looks like Rachel's group is not necessarily fleeing mass culture of the suburbs, but maybe corporate culture. But so I wanted to pose that then to Rachel. You know, is it mass culture? Is it corporate culture?
It's both, because it's also the sort of given that the next step is that I'm gonna have to get a house. I'm gonna have to, you know, all the things that are really gonna, like a big word they use, tether me to a lifestyle that I don't even see anyone is happy with, and it's just going to lead to more consumption and more sort of closed-mindedness about what even constitutes community. I mean, like, I really bristle, I'm going to say something, you know, controversial, but like I really bristle against like images of community around bowling, like bowling alone or going to church, or I hate to say this, but like being with your family, like these obligations, you know, it's like not everybody gets, look at the election, like not everyone gets along with their family. Not everybody wants to spend their free time. Not everybody wants to be obligated to go to family events every week. And so, you know, they're kind of rebelling against that. If you work for Arsenal football and you don't want to drink anymore, you can't work there. That's a drinking culture. If you work for Google and they're telling you, yeah, you're here all the time, but we'll do your laundry, we'll do your dry cleaning, there's ping pong, there's pour over coffee, you know, it's like, right, so that I don't leave. You know, like they're trying to keep you at work, you know? And so that's like the capital K, that's a capital C culture that they're bristling against, this idea that like, wow, isn't this cool? Like they do your laundry for you and like there's sushi, you know, and it's like, yeah, just so you can be at work all the time. And so you have no time. I think for those people, especially if you identify as creative, it's very hard to hear about these visionaries and you're working for them and you're not allowed to do any of your own creative work. Everyone in this room, like you pick your thesis topic, you pick your book topic, like there is some freedom in what we do. You pick how you're going to teach your urban class. But they don't, you know, they're given more clients. They have to do their work at a lower level than they want to. They take a lot of pride. Look at how we're all stressing about how we're going to deliver our courses well, right? We care. We want to deliver a good course. That's how they feel. But they don't have any autonomy really over that. It's like a false autonomy, you know? And I think it's very like I think it is very generational too. I really do. People in their 20s and 30s who are just looking at these things differently because of being raised, you know, as digital natives. And they just see themselves as having more options than maybe I did growing up, you know, in terms of work and where I can do my work. But I do still think of it as a failure of the creative class, because the creative class argument, look at like the imagery around New York, LA, like there's so much promised to you. And believe me, living in a place like Pittsburgh, where Google's there and the people there just like, how can we get Carnegie Mellon? How can we get people who graduate from Carnegie Mellon? How can we get them to stay in the cesspool that is Pittsburgh with the worst air quality in the country? And, you know, these things, how can we get them to stay here? And it's like, well, we have these amenities, we have a bike path and like, you know, microbrews and, you know, it's like you're telling them yoga, you know, trap yoga. Yeah, if you like trap music, we trap yoga. Isn't that what you like? You know, that's cool, right? Right? And it's like, so they're trying to sell you these things, but when? When are you going to have time to do that? And is it even going to be what you thought it was going to be? So I think there is a lot of over-promising in when you're going out into the world and trying to imagine where you want to work. And it's also the other way around, though. It's also the other way where, think about how many of us are on the job market and you're told just get the best job you can get, highest ranked, R1, you know, who cares about your partner, screw your family, who cares about weather, shut the hell up, you know, ASR, whatever. You're told to do that, and you're not supposed to care about place. You're supposed to be happy if you're in Alabama or Pittsburgh or whatever, and people aren't, because place does matter, and they're not finding the like-minded people there. You know, they're not around, or you have to really find them. They're not in a hub, easy to find, and you can't build intimacy with them because they have family obligations and things like that. So they're not just gonna hang out with you and talk for 5 hours, you know? So it is, you know, it really does. I really do think that place matters so much, much more than a lot of people have argued, but how it matters is really different now that we have remote work.
Wow. Brother Kalu, can you jump in? It's really interesting, Rachel. I think about what my friends and their early internship experiences at Lotus, which was bought by IBM in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the biggest thing about it was when they got there was, you know what, we get free soda every day. That was an amenity. And that was like in 89, 90, it was like, wow.
Right.
Did
you ever see the show Girls? Because they kind of show that. On the show Girls, it's a super white millennial show, but on the show, they'll show them with like a little basket with like Cliff bars and Sun Chips. And everyone's making no money, but they're in New York and their parents are paying for them to live there. And they're like stuffing Sun Chips in their backpacks and like eating Sun Chips at home. And they're like, amenities, amenities.
I love it, amenities. You're right, it's so cool. Kalu, jump in. You've been a mentee of mine for over 20 years. Good to see you on this call, but you hang around with all the creatives in New York. You traveled across the globe. As I see, you've been everywhere. I remember just bringing you around to a couple places, and you've transcended all the passport pieces. But Kalu, any thoughts you want to share?
Well, you know, I'm not sure where to really begin, but you know, as somebody who, you know, migrated, if you want to say, to New York City for that dream that Rachel's talking about, I guess I can really speak to that because, you know, and I think we got to think about what it is that attracts us to places like New York, London, Paris, and all of these cities. And I think the main thing is really the culture, right? The convergence of culture, you know, the access to culture, arts, you know, media, you know, academia in some aspects. But, you know, the access is what brought a lot of us there. You know, I was in New York almost 10 years, and I'm saying was because I'm 1 foot out because of the pandemic. And, you know, I think I was heading towards my peak, you know, because it was getting to the point where, you know, I'm over networked, you know, my relationships are there, you know, I've done a lot of things, you know, galleries, museums, you know, anything you can think of. And then it gets to the point, you know, financially where you're like, well, I'm doing okay, but it doesn't really make sense anymore.
I'm hearing when she said the whole 10-year at working at Puma, and Kalu, it made me think about you, about being 10 years in New York or where you're at.
Well, I went from creative, you know, working, you know, in a media and advertising company, and then starting my own production company, to going into finance and working with a family office, a huge family office in New York City. So it got to a point where I was like, you know, I understood that, you know, investment happens in cycles, you know, just like election cycles, and there's different cycles. So investment happens in cycles, you know, 3 to 5 year cycles, 5 to 10 year cycles. So I got to the point where I've gone through 2, 3 to 5 year cycles of investment, meaning I'm spending my own money investing and living in the city. And I have to think about whether I really want to spend another 3 to 5, 10 year cycle investing in the city, because at the end of the day, I don't own my $2 million condo, you know, and the prospects of owning it means me doing some things that I might not want to do, or living how I might not want to live. It might not be as comfortable or as rewarding. So that's what's happening now with the flight from New York as well. A lot of people are like, I'm at the end of my cycle. I can't go out and do the things that brought me here anyways, and it's not worth the money.
Wow. Right on. Right on.
So it's good. It's going to be interesting to see where this goes, because I mean, I've been on numerous calls, business calls, you know, different things on Zoom. And, you know, right now people don't really have to go to many places to do business right now. And it's going to be, besides that physical touch that, you know, everybody's used to, it's going to be interesting to see where this goes.
And Kalu, quickly, can you talk about Nexus Lexus? I know you've been a part of that network for 10 years or 8 years.
Oh, okay. Well, it's Nexus.
Oh, oops. That's my research head. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Nexus
think about research.
Yeah, Nexus Global Youth Summit was something that I played a part in founding with a couple of other folks when I was working at a policy organization in Washington, D.C. So we formed the first youth partnership with the United Nations, so they confirmed their UN Department on Youth and program on youth. And from there, we played a part with the White House as well in gathering a lot of the next generation wealth holders, a lot of families who are going through this huge wealth transfer this next decade, to converge and discuss about issues regarding global decision-making processes. And it's a huge network. There's over 1,000 members globally, and a lot of the main discussions we have now are actually virtual. We used to have a summit every summer in July at the UN where everybody flies in, and now recently we've just been doing, they've been doing bi-weekly online Zoom fireside chats, I guess you can call them, or meetings about different topics and discussions and things like that. So that's even taken an online component now. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this evolves.
Yep.
But it's
John, are you still here? John, are you still here, or did you jump off already? John?
I think, and just to kind of, you know, I don't want to be too long-winded, but I think, you know, there's a lot of emphasis on technology now with, you know, from, you know, like labs and hubs that are happening in cities now. You know, anybody who follows politics now you're also paying attention to what, you know, the Democrats are asking for money for cities. You know, it'll be interesting to see how much of that money is going towards some of the development of this these technology hubs, and that can help create this system or recreate this creative and tech class that'll attract people, keep people in a format or in a system where, you know, everybody can really play a part in the new economy.
Yeah,
you know,
Kalu,
yeah.
Can I say something? Rob, can you unmic for a minute? My co-author's on. One of the things that we think, I'm wondering what you think about this, and Rob can talk. Rob's a business professor. He can talk more about this than I can. But is one of the things in the more of the business section of the book that we talk about is that the barriers to entry for incubators and things like that in places like New York and even Pittsburgh, I would say, are high. Where in Bali, someone like me could be in an incubator. Like I could be like, I have an idea for a business, and I could be. Rob, what is?
That's a good
point. Can you speak to that for a second?
Yeah, I mean, this sort of goes in two different directions. I do think on the staying in the creative class side, it's difficult for most people to imagine making the sort of change that they are making while staying in a creative class city for the reasons, and I missed the name, but our colleague here just noted about all of the stressors of living in New York are you know, echoed by virtually every participant in our study. And so I think the idea that they're going to stay in New York and make that change is very, very rough. And a couple who tried, eventually found it to be way too stressful. But at the same time, yes, of course, if you're really going to move on to the entrepreneurship thing, Bali offers a lot of, nice flexibility. And I think that the key thing to come back to from, I guess, my sense for the purposes of this group is the idea of this community that they're seeking. The number of people who told us, hey, look, Richard, Florida be damned, I'm not feeling community in my neighborhood in New York, in my neighborhood in London. I might know some people in the city, but they don't live near me, and getting together with them's hell, right? So, in order to get that intense in-person lifetime, like-minded community, that's the thing that they're really seeking here. And I think that this is a fascinating point to me that I'm seeing about this new remote work world, is this idea of remote work, but in-person community becoming even more important to people. Because now it's like, okay, my work could be anywhere. That means now I can decide who I sit next to all day, if anyone. I can decide if it's going to be the same person. I can try to make it people who I want to sit next to all day.
I can light a candle in my office. I can sit on a ball or do my back exercises.
One thing, Chip, George, and Rachel, one thing I also want us to, I don't know if we can touch on if we have time for it, but one of the things that we've been dealing with, I think as a country, with all of the social unrest, social inequality, economic inequality, a lot of people are frustrated. A lot of it is also, I think, well-intentioned, but people don't have the tools or the knowledge of how do we transition, right? And when it gets to this topic, I think a lot of the frustration, arises from, okay, what's the future of work? Question. 2, what's the future of school, of education? How do we position our young people and our next generation to win really when it comes to education, really when it comes to access to technology, to different kind of skill sets? That's the big question, and I think that's what needs to be tackled, because a lot of folks who are out of work, or who were out of work before, who are struggling, a lot of it basically they just didn't have the skill set, to get to the next level. You have and they've been talking about this for the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years about not having enough engineers to fill certain jobs, things like that. And we're not teaching that in schools, in elementary schools, in high schools, and we're not teaching these skill sets of the future. And I think that's going to be a big thing to tackle.
I also think that our people in our skill set, in our group, like there were programmers and people who made apps, and there were people from Eastern Europe who had a lot of skills related to coding and things like that. But I think one thing that's hard, picture being in your 20s and the amount that you've been, especially I would say from Eastern Europe, the amount you romanticize the entrepreneur. And like, that's such a big thing in our culture right now. I just did another session on that. The whole girl boss and, like moguls. And like, we had people in our sample who would spend their time between breaks at work at Borders reading like hip hop moguls bios, or, being your own boss is so huge right now in like among influencers, among young people, even people like who do MLMs, who are selling makeup and like essential oils or whatever they're selling, so that like be your own boss thing is so alluring to a certain group of people. And I think like, I would argue that the kinds of people who try to break through in big cities are probably even more interested in that, and they're engaged in that language a lot. and they're going to find more dissatisfaction living someone else's dream while they're toiling, you know?
I would say that we did see a skills issue, though, of the type that you mentioned, which is to say, there's a book that we cite, and I can't remember the name of the author. I'm sorry, she's a media studies person, I think, that really focuses, I think it's in Australia, on people who are in communication-related professions and their difficulties making it as freelancers. And I think we saw some of that too, in the sense that some of the people who have the softer skills, so like you could imagine that one of the risks of the nomad communities, or risks to these communities in the future, is as this becomes more popular, the people who have the less immediately marketable skills, the less distinctive skills, the harder to come by, the less, the less tech skills, the less difficult to come by skills, that they may struggle to really transition themselves beyond the income that it takes to live, say, in Bali, right? In other words, they might, move to a place like that, but never really be able to make the income that they would need, say, to move back to Australia and make it.
Right on. And it's so interesting. I know two young brothers. One, they just had a big section maybe 3 years ago in Atlanta, bringing together all the creative community, black students and black entrepreneurs. Over 300 people were in the room, and I hate to tell everyone, I was the oldest person in the room. So, but it was really great to sit there and hear their struggles and all these other things that they were going through, but how they built community and how they really were working together in the city of Atlanta, where is a large place where we consider the Black Mecca. But actually seeing a large amount of them actually coming together and sharing resources and networking, hearing that energy that they really came across each other. But it's interesting, the founder of that group, he decided he didn't finish Morehouse College. He said, I don't need to go to school anymore. But he decided he was trying to find somewhere to put his table, because he got a job in Silicon Valley, and he put his table with a friend, and he lived in his car for 3 months to actually take that job, that dream job that he wanted to in Silicon. He lived in his car for 3 months.
That's his version of geo-arbitrage, though. That's his version of getting his rent taken care of. He's not living Bali expenses. He's living zero, But that was his. There are people who, I was skeptical at first, but there were people who explained to me that they paid off their loans by living in Bali. The amount of money they saved in a given year is a lot, and so, it is very expensive to live in this. I think there's this myth that if you have a creative class job, that you make a lot of money, but oftentimes you don't, especially in your 20s, but you don't necessarily make that much money. So the expenses are a lot, and that's what he was willing to do. I think that's part of the mythology of starting your own business too, though. You started on a credit card, or if you read business books, they're a lot like self-help books. And they have a lot of language around these kinds of sacrifices.
Big time.
And that's part of the adventure, right? That you started in your garage, and that's a huge part. That's part of the story you're going to tell one day, right?
Yes.
I think the soft skills were bigger. Oh, I was just going to say, I think the soft skills were a bigger thing for women than for men. Like, you didn't see very many women coders and stuff like that. You saw more women doing writing and life coaches and stuff like that. And those are skills that are hard to make a living in the West on, I would say.
Fang, are you ready for your question? And we have, I think, two. Robert has one, and one more, and then we'll close this out.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel. I really, really enjoy the presentation and also the themes your book and Robert, your book touch on. I work on this kind of the place identity in Shanghai as well, and I see lots of parallels. Maybe I'll send you a message later as well. So there are two things I want to mention. First is going back to Hillary's point about this neo-colonialism. Rachel mentioned that as well. And then, so what I've been thinking about is all the people probably mostly people you interviewed are from Western countries. their passport allow them to travel, to stay in Indonesia for a prolonged period of time. Think back, my research participants, they are this upper middle class wealthy Chinese, but their Chinese passport prohibit them to participate in this kind of global citizenship lifestyle choice. So there is this kind of the Western, the neoliberal, not neoliberal, neo-colonial elements in this, which I find fascinating. Because what your participants, I feel they are articulating, they are trying to do is a flexible place identity. It's something I try to develop. So in that sense, citizenship still matters. I love your point saying that place really matters. Place matters for the sense of community, for the type of lifestyle. But I want to see, I hope there's some little mentioning about really the citizenship matters. And now under COVID, lots of borders have been closed, and then only their own citizens are allowed to come back or go to the place. And another thing is kind of a quicker question: how long they stay in average in Bali? If they move to New York, is a lifestyle choice. It seems like they move to Bali is also a lifestyle choice. And in that sense, you know, it could be just a life phase. Few years and they move on, and then so it's not like they don't have this intention to build a more permanent when we think about community associated with home ownership. There's no intention of building that to start with, so maybe the bar is lower to make friends for this flexible community. Yeah, I think these are my two questions. Also maybe speculate a bit how when the majority is work from home, they do not constitute a very peculiar and unique lifestyle anymore. Thank you.
Jan, do you want to jump in? Rachel?
Just about like if it's a phase. Yeah, like so some people have said things like, oh, this is, you know how people want to like, they want to say this is the same as something in the past. So they'll say like, oh, this is just like in the 60s, like hippies would drop out and they would like go to India and, you know, meditate or stuff like that. And I mean, the big difference here is they're here to work. So when you try to make those comparisons with them, they're telling you, no, you know, I want to work. Like, work is so important to my identity. I want to find something that means something to me. Rob?
Yeah, I completely agree. These are very work-focused people. Their work identity is prominent. I mean, that's why they're doing this, is they were unwilling to give up their work identity, and they were frustrated that it wasn't being fulfilled in their old lives. And so I think that, you know, that's a super important thing. I mean, look, these people are an avant-garde of work. Right, this is an extreme sample of people. They're very proactive, very unusual in many ways. But I think that why this is a good topic for qualitative research is that through studying this really extreme group of people, you know, we can learn some, I think, and we have learned, I think already we've seen through COVID, some things that are that these people have been addressing for a while that are not identically importable to the masses of people forced into remote work, but that have, you know, parallels, have important insights that can be shared with a much broader group of people. I mean, even those who are, you know, especially obviously not going to chuck their lives and move to the other side of the world, but that these insights are still, you know, I think useful for people who are just, you know, they're planning to stay put, but are still pretty frustrated about their community, about their work, and about how those things are going together.
Related to what Fang said, we have these like three, I mean, we made these like categories of people, which are like the honeymooners, like the people who are like, you know, fuck my boss, I quit my job, I'm going to put on some elephant pants and go to Bali, you know, that kind of people. And you know, that's the first group. They're the honeymooners. This is exciting. They're thrilled to be out of their job. They're happy. The next group are like what we call the visa runners. They're people who've decided to commit a little bit longer. So after 2 months, you have to get your visa stamped. Usually they go to like Singapore because it's close by. They get their visa stamped. Sometimes they don't even leave the airport. They get right back on the plane to Bali again. And that's showing a longer commitment. And then the third group, what we call, what do we call them? I forget.
Resident nomads.
Resident nomads. And those are people who stay. And there are people who've been there for years. And we say to them, oh, you're not really a nomad anymore because you live here, you know, and they're like, well, no, I'm still a nomad. Like, because their identity is that they are not me and Rob. They're not buying a house and having a family and staying in Pittsburgh like losers. You know, they can move. They choose not to move, but they can move at any time. You know, and so it's all about that freedom identity, that nomad identity, that like I am the boss of me identity. And so but they're still actually, some of them have lived there for 3 years, 4 years. The people who own the co-working space, who've been there for many years, we said, so you're not a nomad anymore. And they were like, and I literally believe this, Rob doesn't agree with me. I think they left. I think we made them move by calling them. But by telling them they weren't nomads, I think that really bothered them.
You called them out.
You know, Rachel, we are nomads, and we're moving. And they did that. But that really attacks their identity to say that you've been in the same place for a long time, you know?
That's powerful. That's powerful. Do we have any more last questions? We've at time. This was such an amazing time, y'all. I really appreciate it. Hillary, you have something in hand. Is that a big hand clap, Hillary?
Thank you, Hillary.
Everybody, thank you. I wish just closing remarks, and please, Rachel, any closing remarks? Jan, any closing remarks?
I'm just going to give you prayer hands, Balinese prayer hands. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Labor of love. I love this project. It was something totally different for me. And it was fun to study something that wasn't just about neighborhood problems and crime and stuff like that. It was just nice to do something a little different. Thanks for letting me do it.
And I just wanted to thank Rachel for inviting me into the session, and George, a great job with the marketing and especially rescheduling also. Thank you so much.
And can I say one thing to Jan? You guys don't know this, but when I was in grad school at Ohio State, I won the Graduate Student Paper Award in our section, and Jan won Best Book Award, and my award was Jan's book in the same year. And that's how I met Jan. It was on Chinatown.
So I think you're going to win the best book, maybe, Rachel. A great book, and yeah, we really look forward to it.
Yeah,
great. Everyone, be safe this semester and this year. We're going to learn a lot of who we all are as individuals and sociologists, and just watching how our campuses and our administrations handle all this. So, I can't wait to learn from everybody.
Don't forget to stay in CUSS and renew your membership.
Right. First things first. Stay in it. Don't leave. We need you.
Save $30 for that. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So
bye, guys. Thank you.
Yep. I'm gonna get the video out to everybody and all that, and I'm just copy this for Jan and Rachel. Some of the notes in here, so we all have that. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Right.